Grace Poe is, of course, very familiar to all of you. She views fighting hunger as one of her personal advocacies. She took up development studies at the University of the Philippines and obtained her political science degree from Boston College and is currently a fellow at the Lee Kuan Yew Policy Center at the National University of Singapore. Aside from filing a bill seeking to establish a standard lunch program for public school children, she recently delivered a privileged speech, and I think many of you heard it. And she spoke about the need for a comprehensive action against hunger. So speaking about collaboration and the need for something that's comprehensive. She is also the author of the Sustansya sa Batang Pilipino Act, the Corporate Farming Act, and Tulong sa Kabataan sa Agrikultura Act. Let's all welcome Senator Grace Poe.
Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Good morning. Given the format of this forum, I will dispense with reading my speech. So whoever's doing my PowerPoint, maghabol na lang kayo. We will try to do this as informally as possible. But before I begin, of course, I'd like to acknowledge, I think, an ally of mine, Secretary Dinky Soliman, and the country director for the World Food Program, Mr. Agrawal, who did a presentation in my office before my privileged speech, Ms. Che Hofilenia, Glenda Gloria, and the development partners, NGOs, and civil society groups. I'm sure there are also perhaps students here from AIM, maybe? None. Okay, so the Rappler group. I was invited by Maria Ressa here just a few days ago, but it was necessary for me to be here, particularly because for the past how many months, that's what we've really been advocating. Hopefully passing the law that will help our public school children have a standard lunch program in school. Now, I remember 10 years ago, my father, Fernando Poe Jr., was asked, "What do you think is the greatest problem that face our people day to day?" And he said it quite simply. He said, it is how to provide altanghap, almusal, tanghalian, hapunan, and breakfast, lunch, and dinner, for those of you who don't speak Filipino. Well, many laughed at him for oversimplifying the problem. But if you talk to many of our countrymen, the problem for them is as simple as that. How are they going to provide food on the table? Of course, for educators, technocrats, autocrats, everybody will be thinking the problem is not that simple. And absolutely, to be able to arrive at food security, a lot of things have to be done. So here are some remarkable statistics, which of course we don't just rely on statistics, but at least it will jolt us and wake us up a bit. 15 million from the Food Agricultural Organization said that 15 million Filipinos are undernourished. I'd like to correct what was said, there's 15 million children. It's 15 million Filipinos who are undernourished. UNICEF ranks the Philippines 9th when it comes to stunted growth of children. The World Food Program, please correct me if I'm wrong, says that the Philippines loses about 2 trillion pesos due to malnutrition. UNESCO ranks the Philippines 5th in the number of dropouts, student dropouts a year. And this is, and they're saying that there are about 1.4 million students who drop out due to many different reasons, but I think the biggest reason perhaps would be hunger and not being able to have the money to be able to buy food when they go to school. Now, UN says that there are about 6 million malnourished children, and here's what you can probably extrapolate and decide if you think this would be applicable. But SWS says that 9.3 million families consider themselves food poor. Now, if it's 9.3 million families that at one point will experience hunger and consider themselves poor, for every family you have about 2.5 children. So let's just make it 3 per family. That's about 27 million children who are apparently experiencing hunger in our country. So all of this is unacceptable, particularly because our country is experiencing growth. They say an average of 6%. So obviously, where we're at right now is not trickling down to the ones that need it the most. Now, we can't blame this particular administration because this problem has been going on. And thanks to this administration, we now have programs to at least address certain issues of poverty, like the conditional cash transfer program. Now, let me talk about the CCT. I think it was 63 billion last year, right? I just returned from a trip in Singapore where I was a Lee Kuan Yew fellow. And well, there are many programs that they do, and we know where Singapore is at now in terms of development. I think they're number one in terms of ease of doing business. They're one of the richest countries in Asia, given that their resources are so limited and their population is so small compared to ours. But you know how some people are saying, oh, we shouldn't be doing dole-outs, we shouldn't be giving too much to we should make them more independent. Well, in Singapore, aside from providing housing, which we know this is something that I forget again the term, they subsidize. They subsidize housing to make it affordable for people to own a property and to have shelter. Remember, food, shelter, and protection, the three basic needs. When I was shocked to find out that they have some sort of financial program. I was discussing this with Secretary Suleiman because, you know, the CCT's been getting a lot of flack. And just briefly about this, in Singapore, if you are considered at the bottom 10% and you need financial help, the government has a program for you. And unlike here that they give it in your bank account directly and you get your ATM and you get it from the local banks, in Singapore, it's almost like entering a financial institution like, let's say, Charles Schwab or whatever. You enter into a room and you have a financial advisor who assesses what you need. And then they give you, aside from the shelter subsidy, you have your food subsidy and you have the cash subsidy. Now, you say, well, there are how many people in Singapore and how many in the Philippines? True. That's why it takes probably longer. It's not an excuse for us because in our country, we have definitely more natural resources than Singapore. So it's possible. Now, in the recently concluded World Economic Forum in the Philippines, they said that there are 3 advantages our country has, or the Philippines has. Number 1, somebody mentioned that it is our young population, young workforce. Number 2, it is our untapped natural resources. And number 3, well, it is our consumerism, enthusiastic consumers. I'm not sure if you really like that. But, okay, how do we turn this advantage into something that can really work for us? We have to be able to support it. If our young population is our advantage, then we need to take care of our kids. Because, well, Goldman Sachs says that in 2050, the Philippines will be the 13th largest economy. But for us to be able to be competitive at that point, the workforce at that time should be intelligent enough, should be able enough, and they're not going to reach that potential if at the very beginning they are already hungry. So if the government is shying away from subsidies or incentives, we should be able to think of it as an investment for the future. So how much will this know? So now why are you saying that, why is legislation important? Kasi alam naman po ninyo, pag iba yung administrasyon, iba rin ang kalakaran. If the administration is different, then the way that government is run could change. But there are certain things that may remain the same, particularly if we have our laws in place. We need to institutionalize these programs. So in this particular case, the government under President Noynoy, for next year's budget, we will already be, through the public schools, will be taking care of our severely wasted children. So that's about 500,000 in the public school system. And the DSWD, through their daycare program, will also have about 2 billion pesos, a little bit more, or maybe a little bit less than 2 billion? 2.3 billion. So 2.3 billion for the daycare centers. So the Aquino administration is doing something about it. But how do we make it even better? So the Sustansya ng Bayan Pilipino, ng Batang Pilipino, which I'm pushing for, will institutionalize a lunch feeding program in all public elementary schools. Now, it is expensive. It is not cheap. But this will go directly to the stomachs of our children. But we have to ensure that the logistics and the way that we will provide these meals will be efficient, effective, and it will not be subject to corruption, or at least very little corruption. If I'm sorry, I'm just being pragmatic, but no, let's aim for the best, okay? Zero corruption. Mahiya naman sila, no? Kasi pagkain to ng mga bata. Batang ninanakawa. Now, not to lay blame on others, but we've learned our lessons from the past. There was a feeding program that supposedly provided instant noodles that was RDA infused, but it was found out that it was overpriced and it wasn't necessarily nutritious. So that turned off that program for a feeding, institutional feeding, because a lot were saying we're weary about it, that it was a cause for corruption. But now we're trying to change things. There are fine examples. The Busog Lusog program of Jollibee is very successful. I've seen a menu that they provided, and meat, like meatballs, but it's really malunggay balls that they provide, or lumpia with vegetables, toge. How many of you have forgotten to eat that? Sausaw sa suka, masarap yun. At sa bawang, kung hindi mahal ang bawang, kasi umaabot na sa, hindi ko na alam kung 300 yata ang kilo. Pero, this is what I'm saying. There's the Blue Plate program of Ateneo in partnership with the Rotary Club, which is also very successful. So we have NGOs that can provide the framework if we're willing to listen. And now that we have Secretary Armin there, now is the best time to roll out a project of this magnitude for our countrymen. So we're pushing for it, and Senator Pia is very supportive because she's the Committee on Education and also Health. So she's pushing for it. But I'd like to give you a side story. So Senator Cheese is our finance committee head. So I go to him and I say, can't we at least have a pilot program so that we have a basis to see how this actually works? Let's choose a few schools that we can give 100% lunch and subsidy. I said, yeah, go ahead. We'll give you the list of schools with the most number of, let's say, undernourished kids. So we start choosing, and then I submit it to him, and then he looks at it and he's like, but aren't we feeding the undernourished kids? I go, but kawawa naman yung mga ibang nandun sa school, nakatingin lang. Hindi ba pwedeng kung pipili tayo ng 100 na school, lahat na lang sila, wag na yung undernourished kids? And he told me, hoy, hindi party ito, ha? No, but he's being careful with our budget because I guess he wants to make sure that we directly help first those that are in most need. But what we're trying to do is, sagarin na natin. Diba? Sagarin na natin, ituloy-tuloy na natin para sa lahat ng mga bata. Alam mo, ang dami-dami mga ginagasta ng gobyerno na sayang, ha? Ma'am, I'm sorry, but diba, this is our job also, is to be able to make sure that there's transparency in government. For example, the buyout for the MRT, which is so ambiguous. If we buy it at, I don't know, 53 billion, will we really own it? No. Just a portion of it, some operating rights, etc. I forget the exact term. But the feeding program, let's see how much it will cost. I just want to give you an idea. Okay, we have about 15 million students from K to grade 6 at 14 pesos per child per day. And this is without the support of the non-government organizations. I don't think you have that in our PowerPoint. Anyway, that will be about 210 million pesos a day. That's a lot. Times 200 school days, that's about 42 billion pesos per school year. It's really expensive. But imagine all the kids and directly to them. So, I think that the government should do what it can to be able to afford this type of program. This is our advantage. Can you imagine when you're going to work, You see the lines along the MRT, LRT lines. Pagtingin nyo, mga bata, di ba? We have about an average of like 20s and in their early 30s working. China, by that time, in how many years, their population, I think, I'm sorry, but I think it's um, one in three. Anyway, will be aging. Will be more than 60 years old also. In Singapore, they're encouraging their population to have more kids and providing them with the best education. Do you know when I went to this school, it's called Guangyang. Guangyang, my son was with me. Anyway, so there was about 20 kids or a little less than that. They said, welcome, Senator Po. Sana po magustuhan niyo ang aming paaralan. This is in Singapore. These are Filipino kids who are studying there. So I learned about their school. When you enter, it's almost like entering IS or the British school with their facilities. And so they were talking about their education. And then what they said to me was, well, they have to pay 13 Singapore dollars a month for their education. But if they qualify because they can't afford it, it's 100% subsidized. Not only their education, but their food as well. Goes hand in hand. You won't learn unless you have the proper support for food. Okay, so before I wrap up, I think we know that other countries, such as England, the UK, has an early childhood program for feeding. This is a rich country with a per capita that is much higher than us. And yet they have a feeding program because the early years are important. Mr. Agrawal will support me in this. From conception to 2 years is the most critical. After that, it's hard to be able to salvage what they've lost in their brain development. And sadly, the most affected by that are the younger kids, the 5 years old and below. They're the ones that don't have the support. So we have the success also in Brazil, which was mentioned. I think in a span of 6 years, 20 million of them were lifted out of poverty. So I have also so what am I doing aside from the Sustancia Act? We have the Corporate Farming Act to be able to study and support the whole process of our food chain and food production, not just from the farms, but distribution, seed subsidies, post-harvest facilities, etc. And also the tulong sa kabataan sa agrikultura. Why? Because the average age of a farmer is about 57 years old. Wala nang gusto mag-farming. And yet, more than 90% of our rural folk depend on agriculture for their living. So you have the older people working our farms. We don't want to say that we're not going to import anything, but think about it. If you buy garlic from abroad, the landed rate is 17 pesos per kilo. You buy it here in Ilocos, it's about 40-something pesos a kilo. Because they don't have any support from our government. So, I mean, not that they don't have any, but they need more support from our government. So, no, seriously. You know, there's a lot to be done. I'm not saying 6 years is a short time, but certainly with all the problems that have compounded, we need to do a lot. That's why before this president leaves, let us please pass, I'm asking them to please pass what we need to pass to guarantee the future of our children. So, as I end, I would like to read my favorite quote by Robert F. Kennedy. He said that, we cannot measure national spirit by the Dow Jones average, nor national achievement by the gross national product. And if the gross national product includes everything, there's much that it does not comprehend. It does not allow for the health of our families, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It is indifferent to the decency of our factories and the safety of our streets alike. It does not include the beauty of our poetry and the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. The gross national product measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And so I'd like to thank also Secretary Dinky Siluman, because I think her job is perhaps the hardest. You can't just give your expertise and go to this place and make Mando people do this, do that. As the Secretary of of Social Welfare and Development, you should be able to sympathize and condone with the people and make them feel that you care. And I'm sure, ma'am, we have good and bad days, and it's not always easy. Thank you.